Hello, everyone. My name is Simone Phipps, and I am an associate professor of management at Middle Georgia State University, as well as an associate research fellow at the University of Cambridge Judge Business School Center for Social Innovation. I am also a member of the Thinkers50 Radar class of 2021. And today I am joined by a brilliant woman and my dear friend, Nelly Wamaitha. And I am going to allow Nelly to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. It's such an honor to be a part of this. My name is Nelly Wamaitha, and I am from Kenya. I'm a lawyer and a theologian, and I'm currently pursuing my PhD at Emory University here in Atlanta, Georgia. My work focuses on how the law participates in creating and sustaining inequality between the developing world and the so-called development partners in the developed world.
Okay, so Nelly, our topic of conversation today is cooperative advantage, working towards social justice. So when I think of social justice, I think of equality and equity for everyone in society. I think of the idea of fairness and fair play when it comes to opportunities and privileges for everyone to have, regardless of gender or race or ethnicity or religion or any other such difference that someone may have. However, as you know, we're just not there yet. Social justice seems to be really evasive, elusive, and especially for women. And so I was wondering what you think is the main social justice issue for women today.
I learned yesterday that about 132 million girls who should be in school are not in school. I mean, I knew that girls miss out on going to school, but I didn't know that the figure is about 132 million. I mean, that's a lot of girls. And I thought about these 132 million girls. I thought about their present. And I'm like, why are they not in school? And of course, there are a million answers to that. But I know that for many of them, the reason they're not in school is because they are girls. I mean, there are other reasons, but their being girls is a huge factor of them being out of school. And we as a global community have so organized society, so organized families and cultures and religions and nations and healthcare institutions and educational institutions, so that and the global economic order, so that being born a girl for many girls reduces their chances of getting an education.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought about the future of these girls. I mean, what do their futures look like? Mm-hmm. Barring a miracle, not getting an education in today's world is going to hamper their chances of getting a job. And if they don't get a job, if they do get a job, they'll probably get jobs where they do not earn that much. And the stage is sort of set for that cycle to repeat itself. I'm like, they're just children and they are already disadvantaged. I mean, that is the world that we have created. And surely there is something wrong with that. I mean, what is the biggest social justice issue for women? For me, it's the fact that we live in a world that is rigged against women. A world in which women play second fiddle to others, a world in which, because of how unfairly everything is set up, women are constantly playing a game of catch-up, if they are playing at all. I mean, these 132 million girls, a lot of them, they're not even playing. I know many of them are in the developing world. Many of them are girls of color. They're disadvantaged in some way or the other. I mean, I think about the question that women have to ask themselves and ask themselves quite often: can women do it all? And this is the question of someone who can clearly see that the odds are stacked up against them. I mean, when you think about the question, you only ask that question when you think, oh my God, can I actually do it all? They can see that the system is not set up to help them win, that in order to win, they somehow have to beat the system. if they can. And to me, that question, can women do it all, is not just a question. It is a judgment about the injustice of unequal systems and how they disadvantage women. And people, societies, cultures, religions, nations, all of these have views about the capacity of girls and women, about where women belong and where they don't belong, about what they're good for and what they're not good for, about how high they should aim and what dreams they have no business having, about what a full life for a woman consists of and what it is not, how much should be invested in women and how much too much. For some of those girls, education has been deemed to be too much of an investment for them, one that the family cannot afford, given their other very important investments. And, when we should speak at all and when we should keep quiet and listen.
Right.
Women don't get to set the rules, let alone control the resources. They don't get to participate in setting the agenda. And of course, this means that their full humanity is very often denied. For me, this is the big issue that women have to address, or at least that has to be in relation to women.
Right. So what I'm hearing you say really is that you think the root of the problem is that there is a gap or disparity or an inequality when it comes to how women are perceived in organizations and society. So it's really a disparity in terms of role perceptions of women and role expectations of women. So how women are viewed, how they are perceived, how people view their role in society, what they should be doing, what they should have access to, and the expectations they have, okay, you are expected to be in this particular sphere and not in this sphere. And therefore, if you are expected to do this particular role, then you don't need to be educated. And of course, when you have that problem, then it leads to these challenges that women then face, starting from when they're little girls, them being denied access to education. And as you mentioned, really you need a good education to be able to be successful. It helps a lot. A lot of doors are closed to you if you don't have that education. And even if you have the education and you're well qualified as a woman, then you face those challenges of hiring in organizations. Some people who are in charge of organizations, who are like gatekeepers, they might see a woman who's well qualified, but the first thing they think is, eventually she's going to get married, or she is already married and she's going to have kids. And so that attention is going to be taken away from the organization. She may not be as committed, etc. And then if she does get the job, then there are a lot of obstacles in terms of women progressing and having promotional opportunities. And we all know that there is a real lack of women when it reaches the upper echelons of the corporate world. And we hear about the term glass ceiling that women have to break through. And then for women of color, it's even more challenging, and people term it, a concrete ceiling or a concrete wall that they actually have to break through, which is really difficult. And then, of course, as you mentioned, we can't forget those women in the developing countries that really have it, some may say even more difficult, all the challenges against them, because they are seen as less than and not really deserving of the opportunities that men should be deserving of, or have access to those opportunities. So you make a really good point about that issue of it being so broad, and so you really have to try to pinpoint what is the root of all these problems contributing to the lack of social justice. And so you really have to look at that disparity in how women are perceived, the root being the perceptions and the expectations of women to start with, that contributes to all these problems.
Yeah, it really is broad, and it's stacked up. The world is stacked up against women from from birth.
Right.
Various as you say. Yeah, there are all these problems that women have getting a job. You're just thinking about employment, getting a job and advancing, like you have said. And as we begin to think about how to address these issues, where do you think we might start, Simone?
Well, for me, I really do believe that this idea of increasing cooperation and striving for what is termed a cooperative advantage is important. So my research partner and co-author um, have termed this concept of cooperative advantage, and it's steeped in African traditions of cooperation. So a lot of African societies have seen the importance of cooperation, and they really do embrace that idea of cooperation. And when slavery occurred and Africans were brought to the Western world, that idea of cooperation didn't totally die. And so even in the African diaspora, people of African descent in the US and in other countries like in the Caribbean, they still have some practices that reflect cooperation. For example, in some countries, you have something like a susu, and a legitimate susu is like a rotating savings sort of account where everyone pools their money and then every so often, maybe every month, everyone gets a hand. And you have other practices like gayap, for example, which is like lend a hand, where people come together and help someone build a house or something like that. So cooperation has always been a part of African society. And so this idea of cooperative advantage is steeped in this African tradition that's called Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. And the tenets of Ubuntu are spirituality, dialogue, consensus building. And so when we try to define a cooperative advantage, my co-author and I, we define cooperative advantage as the benefits really that you can obtain by being people oriented, people centered, and embracing those qualities or tenets of spirituality, dialogue, and consensus building. And it's really important to note that spirituality does not have to be about religion or religious ideals. It's about well-being, thinking about the well-being of others and not just yourself. That idea of care and building community, and dialogue has to do with encouraging discussion and conversation about things. And for that to happen, you need to make sure people are included. You have to be inclusive. You need to make sure you build that relationship, that rapport with people, and maintain that rapport, so people keep voicing their opinions. So you need to make sure you interact with people on a regular basis. And of course, consensus building is built on dialogue. And so you have to, in order to reach consensus or agreement, you really have to explore discussions fully, really listen to people when they converse with you and share their ideas, and allow people to self-organize and to really have a voice to try to reach agreement. And so why I think cooperation and striving for cooperative advantage is so important when it comes to women is because I can see them being much better off. Can you imagine how reality would be for women? How much better off they would be if organizations and society really cared about women's well-being, if they really wanted them to be okay. And they should know that their well-being is going to be partly dependent on the education they have, on the opportunities they have, equal access to opportunities and privileges. And so if they cared about their well-being, if they really intentionally try to engage in dialogue with women, so that they can listen to their views of what the actual status of their life is now and what they want to be, how they perceive themselves, so that organizations and society don't only rely on their own perceptions, but they listen to women's perceptions of themselves and their perceptions of their role and what they should be doing. And they listen to women's expectations of what they want to achieve and where they see themselves, what they see as pursuing as accomplishing and what it means for them to fulfill their true potential. If organizations and society really listen to women, engage in that dialogue, and then honestly, genuinely try to reach agreement with women, together, they work together to try and make sure that it becomes a reality for women, then the reality for women is going to be very different when it comes to social justice. And so I'm thinking about history. And in the US, you know, during that era of segregation, and racism and so much disparity. I mean, there still is now, but back then, where in that time frame that we called, that's termed the golden age of Black business. It
Mm.
was termed that because it was a time where things were really difficult, really challenging for Black people. And yet, Black businesses were being successful. There was a lot of successful Black businesses. There were a lot of successful Black businesses and successful Black businessmen men and business women. And my mind runs on a particular individual, a really phenomenal woman in my view, a visionary, a pioneer in the business world. Her name was Magelina Walker. And she clearly embraced this idea of cooperation and striving for that cooperative advantage. And because of it, she was able to change the lives of people in the Black community and especially Black women at that time. And so she was the first Black woman in the US to own a bank. She was also president of that bank. And because of that bank, it was called the St. Luke Penny Savings Bank. Because of that bank, the Black community and women were able to not just save money, but to create businesses. They were able to have, decent jobs, and home ownership significantly rose during that time. And that's a big deal back in those times for Black people to own their own home. It was a rare thing. And also, because of that, it helped with not just economic development, because of her idea of embracing cooperation. It helped with economic and social development. And that wasn't the only initiative she started or had a hand in. She was also instrumental in the creation of a department store called the St. Luke Emporium. And that department store provided goods and services, but not only that, it allowed women to have employment opportunities and to not be just relegated in that sphere where they're seen as, okay, as a Black woman, you can only be a domestic, or those other marginalized roles like a washerwoman, etc. So they were able to learn other skills and have a job in the department store and in the bank. And so life for them really was transformed. They ended up getting more opportunities. And so I'll just mention one more initiative, which was the St. Luke Herald, which was a newspaper that she started. And that helped as well because it opened up dialogue and really pushed for people to see the plight of the Black community and Black women, issues like segregation, lynching, educational disparities, etc. So because of her work, because of her idea that cooperation was important, because of her striving for that cooperative advantage, her caring about the well-being of the Black community and especially the Black women, because she had a special place in her heart for Black women. She didn't want them relegated to one sphere. She wanted them to have potential to do whatever they wanted to do, because she engaged in dialogue and explored the discussions and allowed people to come to her, had an open door policy, really wanted dialogue and to try to reach consensus. Things changed, and there was economic and social development for women. And just in contemporary times too, I'd mention, Kate Spade. People are quite familiar with that company, and they have a strategic alliance with artisans in Rwanda, a cooperative called Abahizi, which allows women to have employment opportunities, which really empowers women in that community. And really allows them to have a chance to improve their local communities as well. So just reflecting on the social issues that women face, the plethora of issues that they face, I really think that cooperation and striving for that cooperative advantage is important. That idea of bringing everyone together and working together to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea of cooperative advantage is such a big idea and a really necessary idea. And I appreciate the fact that you're drawing from a marginalized community, in this case, the Black community in the US, because I think that there are things that you can see when you're marginalized, but those who have power have trouble seeing. These Black communities in the early 90s could see that they could not succeed by themselves. And they knew, just because of the way they were situated, that some kind of individual understanding of success where one left one's community behind was not true success. So they, as you said with Ubuntu, they understood themselves as bound up with others and therefore as responsible, not just to themselves, but to their communities, to the communities that form them and sustain them. And I love the fact that the idea of cooperative advantage radically questions the wisdom of the idea of competitive advantage. Competitive advantage is the guiding wisdom of unbridled capitalism, isn't it? You have to position yourself, you have to make sure that you win the game, that you come out on top, and it doesn't really matter what you have to give up in the process of getting to the top. That's the guiding wisdom, that the only way you succeed in business is if you have the competitive advantage, which is sort of just, it pits you against the rest of the world. It's you against the rest of the world. It's not the kind of idea that draws people together, that places people in opposition, to each other. And I like this. I mean, we live in a world where we are constantly put in competition, and being competitive has become a virtue, especially in leadership and in business. That's the virtue. You have to be competitive. It's a great thing if you're a competitive person. And the goal is to be better than, greater than, to be the first. Nations are in competition. I mean, politicians are always capitalizing on notions of greatness. Corporations are in competition. People are in competition. I was thinking yesterday, it's like we're all standing in front of the mirror and going like, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the greatest of them all? Like,
Right.
That's sort of the frame in which we are put. And I think that what the Black community here realized is that when a system is rigged against you, it is futile to compete with those who have an advantage over you without changing the game. I mean, You can't play the same game. You're going to lose because the system is set up is against you. And they understood that in order to have a chance to win, you have to change the game. And they did this by rejecting senseless competition with each other and embracing cooperation. And I think that this is precisely what needs to happen for women if women are to have the chance to participate more equitably in society and in the workplace. The game just needs to change. And so I'm thinking, if we took competitive advantage seriously, how do you think that would impact women in the workplace?
I definitely agree that the world needs to change. And so, as communities, we need to come together and work together and cooperate. As you mentioned, the Black community recognized that in the golden age of Black business, and they did that. And as a community today, they have to do that. And as women, as a community, we have to do that. But I also think, as a general community, everyone needs to embrace that idea of cooperation so that everyone can benefit. So you want women to cooperate, but you also want men to cooperate with women. You want people of all races to come together and cooperate for the benefit of everyone, including all women and all Black women, regardless of color, And so I do think that this idea of cooperation is going to benefit us if we really take it seriously. And how I think things will change is that if everyone, think of it, it sounds really idealistic to people, but if every person doesn't just think about himself or herself, but thinks about the well-being of someone else, including the women that maybe left behind, and they realize, that is not right. They should have equal opportunity as I. They should have equal access as I. And they engage in that discussion and that dialogue to find out, what do you want and how can I help? How can I be a mentor? If they really try together to work together to reach that agreement of how we can work together to make this happen, then it will be a totally different reality for women. Because when you truly engage in that discussion, you truly listen, then your perceptions will change. Organizational perceptions will change. Societal perceptions will change. And so you'll realize, you know what? Women are capable of being in this role and they shouldn't just be relegated to this particular sphere. They realize that, women deserve to have that place that they want to be at and to fulfill their destiny as well. So I really think it will change drastically in every aspect of social justice as it pertains to women, from education to the workplace. It really doesn't matter. Every sphere will be different if perceptions of women and their role in organizations and society changes and expectations change. So, with that in mind, really, that idea of changing perceptions and applying cooperative advantage, embracing cooperation, whose responsibility do you think is it to change these perceptions?
I was thinking, and you even mentioned it, that as you speak, it's very easy to dismiss cooperative advantage as a pipe dream. And I think the one that you used is, it sounds idealistic. People will be like, business is business, and you have to play by the rules of the game. If you want to change it, it's not charity, this is business. And I think that one of the things that I mourn and I feel really sad about is the way that unbridled neoliberal capitalism has stolen our imaginations, because I think that's precisely what it has done. It seems like we no longer seem to have the capacity to imagine a world that is truly different from the one that we are living in. We can imagine these changes here and there, but we can't really imagine radical changes. We're sort of closed in and we're like, this is the way things are, this is the way things have to be, and we have to play the game that is set before us the best way that we can. Business is about competition, we know it. And unbridled capitalism has taken away our capacity to imagine politics differently, to imagine business differently, to even imagine ourselves and the world differently. And for this reason, what I think that we all desperately need some expanded imaginations, and anything that helps us to expand our imagination, sort of removes us from this vat that we've been stuck in, is urgently needed. And for me, that's the value of the idea of cooperative advantage. It dares us to imagine businesses organized around and managed by a radically different idea. If the women of the world are to be treated, equitably, if the dignity of marginalized women in the world, for instance, to be held, we need to be able to imagine a truly more just world, a world where the rules of the game have changed. In fact, the whole game has changed itself in order to make room for women. Because as it is right now, there is very little room that's made for women. We definitely need more room made for women. And I think that when we challenge ourselves to think in this way, when we sort of challenge ourselves to expand our imagination, to not just think me, but to embrace Ubuntu and be like, I am because we are, to see ourselves as fully bound up with others. When we begin to think in terms of cooperation and consensus building and dialogue and not competition, we ourselves become different people. And so on the first level, I see this as a call directed to all of us. It's not just for anybody, because we've all been shrunk by unbridled, capitalism. I see it as a call directed to all of us, that it is the responsibility of all of us to dare to imagine a more just world, and to allow that vision of a more just world to change who we are and to change how we act in the world. And whose responsibility do you think it is?
I definitely agree with you. And you mentioned that idea of capitalism and unbridled capitalism. And what it really does is that it takes your humanity away when you just think about yourself and maximizing profits and maximizing efficiency. You become less humanistic. You don't think about people. And I agree that everyone has that responsibility for social justice to do what they can, and especially those in power. So organizations have a lot of power, and so organizations have a role to play because organizations aren't just existing in a vacuum. They interact with society, and so they have a lot of influence on society, and they can help shape perceptions and expectations when it comes to societal side, in terms of the values that they hold as an organization, the practices and the policies that they put in place, in terms of the investments they make. They can invest in certain causes in order to make things more equitable for women. Also, lawmakers, I see, have a role to play because they too have influence. They can decide what causes they want to support when it comes to making laws, etc. And of course, politicians. I think politicians do have a role to play as well. They, of course, have a lot of power and they can shape society's perceptions and expectations as well. When politicians give speeches or they run campaigns, the rhetoric that they speak, the values they have and what they say hold power for the people that support them and shape perceptions. And so I agree with you that everyone contributes and has the power to contribute to this transformation, and that we really have to transform our way of thinking in order to have real true systemic change that allows women to experience the kind of social justice that we want them to experience in every aspect, of society, and so that women won't be relegated to one certain sphere. And for them to have that justice, that equality, that equity that we want, then they must first be perceived as equals. So there will be no social justice, there will be no equality, there will be no equity if women are not perceived as equals. So I do believe that it starts with that. That is the root, the role perceptions and the role expectations of women that has to change, and therefore we have to change our way of thinking. So thank you so much, Nelly, for joining me. I really enjoyed our conversation, and of course, happy International Women's Day.
Happy International Women's Day to you and all the women out there.
Definitely.